Good morning. It's Friday, October 24th, 2025. I'm meteorologist Andrew Pritchard, taking a look at your Canadian prairies, your weather story here over the next week or two. I apologize for missing the video last week. It was not my intention. I'll go ahead and briefly explain to you guys. I went down to Florida last week. It was fall break for our local school here, so just visiting my wife's family down there. Had planned to upload the video as normal on Friday, but on Thursday of last week, I came down with the craziest ear infection in like swimmer's ear case that I've ever had. Did a little bit of swimming down there. Thursday, my ears started feeling weird, and then Friday, I had a full on double ear infection where I couldn't hear out of both ears. I was running a fever, and then had to catch some flights back home. So like along the way, I'm expecting I'm going to get better tomorrow. I'll feel better tomorrow. And, fast forward a week, I'm still getting my hearing back in my left ear here. And just on Wednesday, 2 days ago, had to go back to my local doctor here. And as of 2 days ago, the doctor said it was the worst ear infection that he had ever seen in someone. So even my right ear that feels much improved, he looked in there and he's like, your right ear is bad. So it's been a pretty bad last 7 days for me, and kind of an unconventional way of being sick. But just have not been able to hear, been running a fever, just not been feeling well for the last 7 days. And I kind of blame just the timing of it, before you're about to catch a couple of flights and have to travel and have a busy weekend with the family. Not a great time to develop a couple of ear infections in both ears. So I apologize for missing the video. It takes a lot to get me away from, my weather mode, but that is about what will do it here. Just a really tough last 7 days for me health wise, as far as the, top 10% of my body goes. Let's get into the weather, though. We do have a lot to talk about. We've got shots of cold air that continue to spill into the region here. We've got several lows that will be passing through the area, but low precipitation from those lows, at least east of the Rockies. Going to be a real wet, heavy week here across portions of British Columbia down into the Pacific Northwest of the U.S. here. We will take a look at the updated winter outlook here. We've got some new looks at the months of December, January, and February. And while we continue to see an active pattern now that's not resulting in much in the way of precipitation, it does continue to look like it could be a fairly wintry winter ahead across portions of the prairies. Now, we look at the last 10 days. Again, it's been pretty quiet. Not a lot to talk about as far as measurable, excuse me, there, except for, the far northwest corner here, Grand Prairie, Peace River, a little bit of activity in those areas, and then far southeastern Saskatchewan into southern Manitoba, some areas there picking up anywhere from an inch to 2 inches of precipitation over the last 10 days or so. Now, as we just animate the satellite picture here, the infrared, you see a couple of things. You've got a kind of a cutoff low meandering down here across the southern U.S., but kind of the attention getter is this big upper level low here spinning around across the Pacific Ocean, pumping a lot of Pacific moisture into British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest. We are seeing some of that moisture kind of spill in here over the top of a ridge that we've got here. Again, this low kind of cutting off, beneath the ridge across the western and the central U.S., and then this flow kind of being deflected north over the top of that ridge as well. So the precipitation, as we look at the radar here, pretty quiet across the prairies. We've got heavier moisture here over the top of the Rockies, and then west of the Rockies across coastal areas here, just continuing to see a lot in the way of heavy precipitation, high elevation snow, and coastal rains, along with high winds across those areas west of the prairies. Now, we wake up on Friday morning. It's pretty chilly across a lot of the region, a little bit warmer as you head toward the west, portions of Alberta, getting toward the southern Alberta and western Alberta areas here, anywhere from 8 to 10 degrees as we get started this morning. But you got some sub-freezing temperatures here across anywhere from Edmonton down to Saskatoon and Regina. You're a few degrees below zero. And as you make your way over to southern portions of Manitoba, just a few degrees warmer there, hovering just maybe a degree or two above the freezing mark, maybe a degree or two below. Now, we'll take a couple looks at the precipitation forecast. First, we'll use the NAM model to look at the near-term outlook as we head through the weekend. Again, quiet for us on our Friday. A lot of sunshine across the prairie, except for far western areas. And as we run through the overnight into Saturday, we could look for some very light precipitation across the Peace River, Grand Prairie area. Edmonton down to Calgary, maybe some very light rain showers or some snow flurries, but pretty inconsequential precipitation from this area of low pressure as it lifts generally north of the prairie here. So not a big precipitation maker here between now and Sunday. And then as we get into the day on Sunday, another area of low pressure lifting into the region. Again, hit or miss showers, maybe some light snow flurries across the region, but this is not a soaking rain or snow event across the prairies. This is really heavier precip well north of Highway 16, maybe some snow here as we get into the day on Monday and Tuesday in areas pretty far north of the prairies. We'll use the European model now to kind of take it a little bit further. We'll go ahead and walk it back here to Friday, quiet across the region. Saturday, quiet across much of the region. It's on Sunday that you see some light showers across portions of Alberta, maybe western Saskatchewan, and then the snow that kind of, takes over as colder air wraps in around the backside of this thing north of Highway 16 as we get into Monday. Certainly northern Alberta could see some snow out of this. Edmonton, maybe some flurries. Wouldn't expect a big precipitation event out of this one. And then across southern portions of Manitoba, we get another low here on Monday into Tuesday, lifting northward with some rain associated with that. So again, this is not kind of taking the form of a big area of low pressure that kind of developed here in Montana and then sneaks here along the U.S.-Canada border, bringing a heavy, rain or snow event. This is really kind of several pieces of this area of low pressure that kind of sneak first to the north, and then another one here that sneaks south and east and just doesn't really organize a whole lot and bring in any, meaningful precipitation to the region. So we make it all the way now to, this is October 28th, 29th. We're pretty dry as far as accumulating precipitation goes, as I've shown you here across the region. We get another low that comes in here Wednesday into Thursday. So this would be October 29th and 30th that I'm rocking back and forth on. And again, you see a well-defined area of low pressure here. Certainly some blustery winds spinning around this one. We'll get another fluctuation with our temperatures. Warmer air feeds in on the north side, or I'm sorry, on the leading edge here out of the south, and then on the back edge out of the north, we get that colder air that kind of wraps around. So with each of these lows, we get some impactful weather, some sensible weather, but they're not bringing a lot in the way of soaking precipitation. So the European model here taking us through Wednesday, so that takes us through October 29th. Total precipitation by type. So you're seeing liquid precipitation here and then snow. So where we expect to see some snow is the higher elevations here, and then areas north of the prairies across northern Alberta, maybe northern Saskatchewan picking up some snow here as well. But this would not be a snowmaker across the prairies proper. Just some very light scattered showers, maybe some snow flurries being visible here as we head through the next 4 to 5 days. The next 10 days look pretty similar. A lot of heavy precipitation right in this corridor here, British Columbia down into the Pacific Northwest, coastal rains, high elevation snow. A pattern like this, though, a lot of the precipitation is squeezed out by the Rockies as these areas of low pressure kind of travel from off-screen across the Pacific Ocean. They sometimes make their way in. I mentioned that one that comes in here on Sunday into Monday, kind of lifted north of the region. Get that another, the next one that comes in here as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday. But much of the moisture is squeezed out as these come over the Rockies, and we just get kind of, some trailing Pacific moisture brought with it. We squeeze some of that out in the form of some scattered showers, but this is not a trajectory or a storm path that brings us heavy, meaningful, disruptive, soaking rainfall or significant snows across the region. We'll just have to kind of wait. The pattern, it's good and active. This is what we like to see, a big scream in Pacific jet stream. I mean, this is what would give us storm systems as we get deeper into the winter season here. But as we kind of play this, you'll watch the flow just in general deflected north here. At times we get a low that kind of sneaks down to the south here. We just don't get a really great wound up area of low pressure kind of lifting into the prairie. But I love to see an active Pacific jet stream. This is the first kind of step in getting us into an active, meaningful winter season. So the problem right now is this ridge that continues to kind of anchor itself across the western U.S., kind of nudging up into western Canada. We've got this persistent trough here and then kind of persistent troughing here. So the jet stream wants to dip, rise, and then dip. And that leaves us, not maybe the best marking of where the actual jet stream is, but when the jet stream is rising, we get these height rises here across this region. Again, that's a recipe for depositing a lot of precipitation here, wringing the storm system out with a dry passage here, and then we get a more active corridor across this area here. So let me just play this, take the drawings off so you can actually see what's going on here, and you just continue to see this ridge kind of reinforcing itself there as we go through the last few days of November into the beginning of October. So week 1, week 2, kind of side by side here. Here's week 1, and then here is week 2, where you see the active, heavy precipitation corridors. It's right here. Coastal portions of British Columbia down to the Pacific Northwest, kind of the same thing here, week 1 and week 2. And then I mentioned a more active corridor here across the northeastern U.S. You see some differing here, kind of the shifting pattern where it's active across the southern U.S. here in the next week, but then kind of shifting and kind of drying up as we get into the second part of the forecast period, week 2. Again, that is very, very indicative of a pattern like this with kind of just subtle ridging right in this area. You're going to have kind of a drier corridor right in the center. So you can kind of trace the flow of the Pacific moisture with the precipitable water chart. Again, as we head through the weekend, you see much of the meaningful Pacific moisture kind of dropping off to the south. Let me go ahead and walk this one back. This is that first kind of patch of really strong flow. We got that area of low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska. Here's your strong corridor of Pacific moisture that is being deposited here in coastal areas. We got these big mountains, this big mountain chain, the Rockies right here. And those as the air flows up over the top of the mountains, it's squeezed, it's compressed, and we wring out a lot of that moisture here across, again, Pacific Northwest into British Columbia. So watch that tongue of moisture just kind of sneaking down into Northern California as we get into October 25th. This is tomorrow. We'll get another shot here. I'll take the drawings off there, but you can kind of imagine the same thing happening. We reload as we get into, this is the next week here, October 28th. You see this next flow coming in, doing kind of the same thing. You see it even spiraling around that area of low pressure. I love looking at this chart here. You can always just kind of pick out a lot of little things within the atmosphere. So this is that next area of low pressure. See, it brings a wave of moisture to British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest, but then you wring a lot of it out. You can see how it kind of vanishes there. You get the next flow that comes in here. This is October 31st, getting into November 1st. This is a pretty big blast of Pacific moisture coming in across the Rockies. And then you see here, just, you get some of it kind of making its way in along the U.S.-Canada border. I'm not going to split hairs on the details here. We're all the way out of the first week of November. But you see the problem with the pattern. It's active. But for us here in the prairies, just not bringing a lot in the way of meaningful precipitation. So let's take a final look here at the European model, the precipitation type forecast over the next 2 weeks. Here's your Friday. This is your Saturday. This is your Sunday. We get kind of this next 3 to 4 days. We get that burst of flow and a couple of areas of low pressure that kind of lift and wrap up before one more sneaks in here across the south. Just really kind of just being squeezed. If you look at what's going on here across southern Manitoba, you've got this flow coming around the area of low pressure up to your north, and then we've got a high off to the east, so the flow is coming around, and we've just got this area where the flow is kind of being squeezed together, and we're wringing a little bit of moisture out there on Monday and Tuesday. You get the next area of low pressure that comes blasting in here Wednesday and Thursday. But you see it here. It's an extremely tightly wound storm. This is going to be high impact in coastal areas. That is high winds, high surf, really heavy precipitation. It's going to be a significant weather maker here across British Columbia in the Pacific Northwest as we get into early next week. Tuesday, Wednesday, October 28th and 29th. But as it makes its way into the prairies, you lose a lot of the moisture and the storm system starts to fall apart. And then all of the activity continues to be kind of focused here, where you got this really intense area of low pressure spinning, fast flow coming around it, depositing high winds and heavy precipitation to folks to our west in British Columbia. But as each low ejects across the Rockies into the prairies, it's weaker and it's drier. So we get maybe some winds, we get some temperature fluctuations, we get maybe some shower activity. But ultimately, we don't see the precipitation that, British Columbia, Pacific Northwest are seeing, which thankfully we're not seeing anything like that. If you follow the values down here, we're talking about 250 to 300 millimeters of rainfall over the next 10 days across, coastal areas, higher elevations. This may be a significant disruptive, potentially damaging, weather event across some of these coastal areas from the Pacific Northwest up British Columbia and into the Gulf of Alaska. Just quiet across our corner here as far as meaningful precipitation goes. It's, again, blame the Rockies. They are the barrier here with a pattern like this. We will be seeing some winds at times with these areas of low pressure as they sneak across the region. I mentioned southerly flow out in advance. Get that westerly or northwesterly flow on the backside, but maybe some strong southerly winds, a couple mild days as these areas of low pressure approach. Look at the winds associated with this area of low pressure here next Tuesday evening. We're talking about winds. I mean, look at these. This is not even gusts that I'm looking at. We're talking 10-meter wind speeds here, getting into the 100 plus kilometer per hour range. So we could be talking about gusts higher than that. But that is, getting pretty darn close to, a little hurricane spinning off the coast there of British Columbia. So big storm system early next week. coastal areas, high elevations, high winds, and heavy precipitation across those areas. But maximum wind gusts over the next 8 to 9 days, taking us through the next week, really, across the prairies. We're talking about, maybe gusting some days here 60 to 70 kilometers per hour. With some of these lows that come through. So we'll certainly see windier days as we head through the winter into next spring, but starting to get more active here as the jet stream comes to life across the Pacific Ocean here, bringing in more in the way of these areas of low pressure to our region. We will see some shots of cooler air making their way across the prairie at times, but with that ridge of high pressure and a lack of, organized cold air off to the north, we don't have anything to really pull a significant shot of colder air down into the region. So for now, kind of the bias is going to be on mild air returning at times to the prairie with these little kind of briefer shots of cooler air. Now, as we look big picture at the next couple of weeks and beyond into the month of December, January, February, I do think we're going to be on a bit of a slow transition into a more active pattern that brings more in the way of these disruptive storm systems with meaningful precipitation along with them. I think it's going to be a couple of weeks before we slowly kind of get toward that, but the latest forecast here from the European seasonal model for December, January, and February kind of starting to lean in the direction of some of our other forecasts here, which is a, higher chance for some colder air and more in the way of storm systems across this region, potentially a snowy winter across the prairies. We see that kind of backed up here by the NMME. The National Multi-Model Ensemble here is going after a wet winter here across the Canadian prairies down into the northern plains and the upper Midwest of the United States, with more in the way of storm systems coming in across the Pacific Ocean, impacting us here. And same thing here as we kind of look at the NOAA forecast, the latest one from NOAA. This one, of course, it cuts off the prairies, but you can extrapolate northward pretty easily with each of these graphics as we just kind of look up into the prairies. NOAA kind of going after a colder winter season across this area and then a more active winter season as well. So colder and snowier starting to become a consensus forecast for December, January, and February across the prairies here. We're looking at a La Nina that is expected to peak early in the winter here. But this is a pretty, cut and paste La Nina forecast here. So we'll just kind of wait to see what some of our bigger players are going to be. Of course, as well as I do, it takes one or two big storms to really define a winter season here. So we'll continue to look for those specific storms, but know that the background state here may support them a little more easily than it has in winters past here as we continue to look at a December, January, and February forecast that looks cold and inactive across the prairies. So we'll finish up with your next 10 days, your high and low temperature forecast. 17 for the high in Calgary today, a little more mild, but should be down to 8 degrees for your high on Monday. And Tuesday, back below freezing as we get into the early and middle part of next week across much of the region. Again, dipping our toes in some of these shots of colder air. Not a big blast of Arctic air or anything like that, but 18 today in Edmonton. You'll be back below freezing for your overnight lows as we get into next week as well. Saskatoon, we'll finish here in Regina. And then one last look in Winnipeg. 10 for the high today, 13, 14 Saturday and Sunday. Back down to highs in the single digits, with overnight lows getting close to the freezing mark mid to late next week. I'll talk to you again next Friday. That'll be October 31st.